This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host, David Charlton. This week's episode is a solo episode where I complete my series of 5 podcast episodes titled Being Comfortable in Your Own Skin. The other 4 episodes I published during the second half of 2021. Part 1, which was episode 69, looked at the pressures placed on athletes at professional level in the light of Naomi Osaka's well-documented mental health battles. Professional women's sport and the pressures of the lack of funding and time demands placed on these athletes, and then youth-level athletes and the demands that they experience too were also discussed. The theme in that specific episode was linked to the fact that in all 3 cases, the demand to be always performing can take its toll. Part 2, which was episode 73, was related more to the culture side of things. In organisations and in clubs, where I talked about the importance of psychological safety across all stakeholders, so people go on to express themselves. People feel more comfortable to discuss their thoughts, their emotions, their ambitions, without being ridiculed or shamed. Then we had part 3, which was episode 79, and the focus here was on self-sabotaging behaviours, where people can get caught in protecting themselves or protecting other people unhelpfully. Part 4, which was episode 85, I went on to discuss being young and the difficulties of being comfortable in your own skin at a young age. It's an episode for parents, coaches, teachers, and sports administrators who care about young athletes, with some helpful tips and advice on how you can better support them. So check out one or all of these episodes if you'd like to learn more. Now for this episode, if you've tuned in recently to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, or you've been reading my blogs, you may have spotted a theme. That's right. A lot of my content recently has related to being able to transfer your skills from training to competitive matches and events under pressure. Today, I'm going to summarize what I've found with 10 areas of importance identified where people often get it wrong. The way I see it, if you're comfortable in your own skin, you'll be able to embrace the pressures of competing and back yourself no matter what situation you're in. You may not win all the time, but you'll be able to walk away with a sense of accomplishment, knowing that you've done everything possible. So I'm going to start with before the match or the event, where lots of people, lots of athletes are immediately in the wrong mindset. So why is that? And it relates an awful lot to do with the way you go about your training or your practice. Point 1 is practice isn't thought out in enough detail. I'm going to refer back to an episode with PGA golf professional and sports scientist Will Shaw in episode 89 and ask you to consider how you plan your practice. This is massively important if you want to be comfortable in your own skin when you are under pressure. Football and rugby coaches often get bogged down in tactics when organising their training sessions, whereas in other sports such as golf and cricket, technique can be their go-to thing to look at. Yet, will this help an athlete feel more confident, more comfortable in their own skin through their practice? Sometimes, yes, it might. I recognise that these areas, tactics and technique, are important, but there is more to it. So here are 3 questions you can ask yourself if you're an athlete, or if you're a coach, you may want to ask your athletes. Number 1, list pressure situations or situations when you've been distracted if you're an athlete. And if you're a coach, note these pressure situations and situations that your team get distracted or find challenging. This is all about raising your self-awareness so you know exactly what you could improve upon. Question 2, what is it about the design of your practice that's giving you as an athlete the confidence to thrive under pressure and not get distracted? Or if you're a coach, what is it about the design of your practice or training sessions that's giving your team the confidence to thrive under pressure and remain focused? Go on, ask yourself that question. Technical practice or tactical practice will help some players to trust themselves more. However, will it engage their brains so that they're feeling like they're in a zone, that they're able to perform more freely? I'm not so sure. So it really needs to be thought out. Question 3. How do I think and feel when I'm at my best in those clutch situations? A lot of people talk about the zone, the fact that they're immersed in the task. The mind is quiet. Time stands still. So I'd ask you, how is this factored into your training and practice sessions so that you can get used to these feelings when it counts, so that you can master these feelings and experience them more and more often? Now for point 2, practice isn't challenging enough. In episode 88 with former professional basketball player Dre Baldwin, he talked about making your practice harder than the game. So here's a question to consider now. How challenging is your practice right now? Chris Paisley, a winner on the European Golf Tour, and I chatted very early in this podcast about this topic, where he shared with me his embarrassment at doing lunges next to a putting green as a punishment for failing a challenge that he'd set himself. Now this takes commitment, serious commitment in an individual sport. Parking your ego, simply being yourself and putting the goal first. So can you do that? Can you put your goal first with a single-minded approach to realizing those goals? Football or soccer and golf are 2 sports that I'm involved in a lot on a daily basis. And I see the following things happening a lot. In golf, like Chris alluded to, most golfers won't want to embarrass themselves by attracting attention by doing lunges or press-ups or the like to add pressure to a task. Yet if they were truly comfortable in their own skins, they'd do it and focus on the goal first and foremost. Then in football, young players can be hugely coach or parent reliant. You won't see many doing 10 minutes extra at the start of a training session or staying on for 30 minutes at the end for fear of looking out of place. They'll just want to follow the crowd and will again worry too much about what other people think. They'll get stuck into mind reading. Sadly though, the crowd, or in this case, unless we're talking about top-level professional football, their teammates and others are likely to hold them back. Do you think Cristiano Ronaldo has thought like that through his career? He's been renowned for his high self-motivation and staying on after training day in, day out. And, it can be a great place to be, knowing that you've outworked your teammates, that you've outworked your opponents. So for football or soccer players, what's stopping you? For coaches, how will you encourage your players to do so with great questions? Telling them, in most cases, will not be enough. Shaming them again won't work either, especially with children. And if you're looking to produce adults who are comfortable in their own skin, to perform in big pressure moments, this really is a crucial question that you should be asking yourself. Point 3, you don't mentally prepare for difficulties. I'm referring to a blog that I wrote about mental preparation in combat sports, where I went on to talk about the fact that top athletes see themselves in tough situations when they're under the pressure, up against it. In fighting terms, they take a beating, a serious beating, getting hurt, or they might not be on it that particular day. But they visualize and program themselves so that unconsciously they can see themselves responding to these sort of events. It's hugely powerful. Most people don't do it and simply leave things to chance. So I'm encouraging you, don't be that person. The top guys in their sports, they don't do that. They take the time to strategize. And that's why they make it look so effortless at times, because their mind and their body are in tune and used to performing in those critical moments. As neuroscientists say, our body can't differentiate between actually what is real or what is imagined. So visualizing yourself in tricky situations should be encouraged if you want to be comfortable in your own skin during these moments. Many people don't want to go there out of fear. They become superstitious and think, if I start thinking about these things, then they will happen. However, the reverse is true. You're actually taking responsibility. You're facing your inner demons and fears by doing this type of imagery and mental preparation. Point 4, you don't have a strategy to stay present. This point links to my interview with cricket performance coach Jared Levin in episode 91. Now, the athlete who isn't comfortable in their own skin may get caught up thinking too much in the past about mistakes and they find it really difficult to move on. They get in their own heads, and then they can get caught out thinking 5-10 minutes ahead and get a little worried or anxious about the future. Or perhaps they might even fast forward 30 minutes towards the end of a game. So the key here is to have a plan so that you can stay present. One thing you could do to bring yourself back is to ask yourself the question, what is my job right now? For the cricketer dwelling on the previous delivery when they're bowling and who's worrying about conceding more and more runs from the rest of their over, the job may be to simply decide on a delivery type, a spot to land the ball, and to commit to executing it. Your job is not to worry about the fourth ball in the over, the fifth ball in the over, or the next over, or the rest of the game. It's to focus on the task in hand right now. And by the way, it is completely normal to think ahead or to think back. The best players, the best athletes do, but they simply see it for what it is. It's only a thought, and they're able to bring themselves back to the moment. And again, get comfortable in their own skin rather than telling themselves a story and judging themselves negatively for getting caught out looking in the past or the future. It is very normal. Point 5, your mindset towards your warm-up sets you up to fail. A common issue that I see a lot is that some athletes assume that if they have a poor warm-up, they're going to play badly. As a result, the footballer would cautiously take time to assert themselves into a game. They'd play the easy pass rather than looking to dominate from the first whistle. If a player has performed badly in recent times, throw in a poor warm-up and often they'll catastrophize. They'll tell themselves it's happened once, so it's going to happen again, that they're going to have a rubbish game. Then they'll be far from comfortable in their own skins when they begin the game. So I challenge you, if these things sound familiar, to view the warm-up differently. See it as simply a way to get loose, to get physically and mentally prepared for the main event, the competition, the match, or the race. Or if you're a coach, ensuring that you know how each and every player views the warm-up. This is going to be vitally important to get the best out of your athletes. You'll find out more on this topic in a recent blog that I've written. Does your warm-up influence how you perform? Point 6, you fail to learn from past mistakes. It can be uncomfortable and painful to stay with past mistakes and look at them in detail. So many athletes are too quick to move on when an error occurs. Or when they look back, they look at the technical or the tactical angle using a video. Coaches too can make this mistake by focusing solely on the technical or the tactical side in this way. What many athletes and coaches don't consider is how their process may have fallen apart in those key moments. What were they thinking or feeling at that time? For instance, a tennis player serving to win a match who goes on to double fault may choose to look at their technique, their body shape, how they threw the ball up in the air, their technique when striking the ball. Yet actually, they may have rushed the serve. They may have not given themselves time to compose themselves between points. They may have been in their own heads telling themselves negative things about the serve. Don't do this, don't do that. The last time they were in that position, they might have messed up. Perhaps the way that they focus their eyes, their eye gaze, that may have been different. So having a process to learn from mistakes and performances is important. Going into more depth than what is common with what did I do well? What could I have improved on? How will I make those improvements? That strategy is good up to a degree, but it neglects a lot of detail. My preference is Gibbs's model of reflection, which is a reflective cycle offering you the opportunity to look at events in greater detail. For example, you would look and describe what happened. You would make a note of what you were feeling and thinking at the time. You would evaluate, looking at what was good and what was bad about the experience, analysing the next step, where you would make sense of the situation. Then you would conclude by asking yourself what else could have been done. And then lastly, and not leastly, you would create an action plan. If it arose again, what could I do? And this advice is taken from episode 86, where I talk about learning from setbacks. And it's vital if you want to be comfortable in your own skin. And as I say, learn from past mistakes. Point 7, you don't have consistent routines. A pre-performance routine can be used prior to an event or a pre-shot routine can be used before a shot as a way to control the environment. It can provide stability in a highly unstable environment. It can trigger concentration, and it can also help decrease anxiety. These methods can also provide a positive focus to someone who can engage in negative self-talk, which often happens, especially when the heat is on, when athletes go on to tell themselves that they can't make the shot or the pass, simply because of the importance of the match or the game situation. So as I discussed with Professor Adam Nichols in the previous episode, the importance of these routines are vital if you want to feel more comfortable in your own skin and perform closer to your best in these big events or matches. One thing you may wish to do is to develop more awareness of what you currently do in these situations. So what you could do is write down what your pre-performance routine looks like in the 48 to 72 hours before a large event. What steps do you go through? What should you be doing to aid your confidence in these events? You can then use it as a checklist moving forwards. Or, if you prefer to look at pre-shot routines, make a note of all the steps that you take before hitting the shot. So, we'll use the previous example, the tennis player serving. You may consider the moments before getting ready to serve, where you stand, what you think about, what you focus on before striking the serve. And the list of steps, it might have 3 or 4 steps. Some people might be more detailed and come up with about 20 steps. It's going to be very, very individual, but also very important. Point 8, your core values are being compromised and influencing your actions. In episode 92 with Dr. James Hegarty, we had a short discussion around the importance of core values. These are things that you believe are important in your life. Personal core values can exist at home, at work, in your sport, or in any area of your life. They should determine your priorities. And if you aren't aware of your core values, you really need to be. If your team doesn't have core values, again, you and your group are in trouble, especially when difficulties arise. There's going to be some personal conflicts that go on to influence decisions. So for example, for someone who plays in a team sport, if perfection is a value, they may be very self-critical, which could mean that in challenging moments, their inner self-talk causes them issues. Likewise, due to their perfectionist tendencies, they might be very hard on teammates as well as themselves, which can be helpful to drive up standards. However, if someone is mentally sensitive, criticism may knock their confidence. So knowing yourself foremost, and then your teammates well, and knowing their values is critical. And you'll note from James's podcast episode where he mentioned a number of exercises that you can do to get clear on your values. I'm going to advise a simple one for now. Simply write down 10 things that are important to you in your life. I put a link to a blog I wrote a while back which can guide you through this process. However, what I would say is about values is they're not measurable, and they're going to be specific words. Words such as excellence, ambition, fun, trust, freedom, friends, family. The list goes on, which you place importance on in your life. So give it a bash and then consider how close you are to being truly aligned to those values right now. Often when our values are being conflicted, it can prevent us to train to our maximum. We might get distracted more. Procrastination can reign too, and being able to then go on to perform freely under pressure becomes more and more difficult. Point 9, focusing too much on results or the scoreboard. The purpose for many athletes and coaches, especially at an elite level, is to win, as Dan Abrahams and I discussed in episode 93. Results are crucial to stay in a job or to receive a new contract in professional sport. And these people in professional sport are hugely competitive too. They hate getting beat. But yeah, that's right, there is a but. With such a focus on outcomes, on results, on the scoreboard, it equals pressure. It means that you can become risk averse. You can become fearful and not fully express yourself. The fear of failure becomes more and more apparent. So from a coaching angle, it's vital that you notice what kind of messages you're giving out. For instance, as I've witnessed a lot in football, are you a football coach guilty of having the following conversations with your players? Come on, boys, today is a must-win game. 3-0 at half-time. If I could substitute you all, I would. That was terrible today. You deserve to be losing by more goals. My advice would be, players aren't daft. Athletes aren't daft. They recognise the importance of games, and they will have the inner drive to win. So try to consider putting to side some of these messages that I've just mentioned there, where you focus so heavily on results, on outcomes, which nobody can control. Try and change it up. So you ask some good questions as a coach instead that are more related to the process. So instead of saying, come on boys, today is a must-win game, why not turn it around? Come on boys, I believe in you all. What do you need to do to perform your best today? Or 3-0 at half-time? If I could substitute you all, I would. Change that. 3-0 at half-time. Let's start over. In the next 10 minutes, what will you do to do your job to the best of your ability? And lastly, that was terrible today. You deserve to lose by more goals. Try this one. You don't need me to tell you that you can do better. Consider how you can raise your levels in training on Monday. These questions are much more likely to motivate someone, to help a player feel better in themselves, which goes on to lead me to my final point, which Carl Bell briefly touched on in episode 87 when he talked about playing as a goalkeeper. So the last point, point 10, psychologically unsafe environments will cause fear. What do I mean by this? Well, whether it's on the pitch when you're passing the ball or selecting a shot to play, many players are going to retreat into their shell, taking a safe approach. Some will even play it safe in a group environment. When they've got the opportunity to share, to voice something, they're going to retreat back and then potentially regret it later. Often situations do crop up where players don't want to tell the coach that they're unhappy about tactics employed or team selection, especially if they've recently had a bad game. So where does this come from? Fear. That's right. Fear is often the big reason. Taking risks come naturally for some people, but they don't for others. Being comfortable, playing it safe, taking the back seat, or being routine-like is a big part of some individuals' personalities. And then throw in sport when players are exposed to competitive, emotion, high-charged environments, where there's lots of attention coming at them from the sidelines more and more. This can become overwhelming and frightening. So to progress in your sport, to feel more comfortable in your own skin, to take risks, to stretch yourself, it's essential that you as a coach help your players. And how do you do this? By creating a psychologically safe environment. Now, psychological safety has interested many people in different psychological fields and in the workplace in recent years. Harvard professor Amy Edmondson described psychological safety as it creates a team climate where people are encouraged to take risks freely and nurtures mutual trust, support, and respect. As a result, employees don't feel a need to censor themselves before talking and aren't afraid to speak up. In sports psychology, Kahn describes it as being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. So how do we create a psychologically safe environment? From top down, from senior management, decision makers in your club or your organization, right down to the very bottom, everybody must buy into this approach, or the chances are that the processes that are put in place will break down. So senior coaches, players are going to need training. They're going to need some time to understand why this is so important and how this can influence the culture. A big key is going to be avoiding the blame game, ensuring that when meetings take place, standards are set around the blame, so everybody is on the same page. It's so easy when things go wrong in sport, when emotions are running high, to get involved in blaming people. However, if you're going to build a sporting environment which maintains psychological safety, your focus must be on solutions and what needs to happen next. For example, in video analysis sessions, often errors will get pointed out by taking the approach of what happened and why, with some finger pointing. Players often would come away angry, deflated, and their confidence would drop. Whereas by asking better questions, such as, how can we make sure this goes better next time? What were you thinking in those moments? Or, To make this move go more smoothly next time, what do we need to do? This can then turn the conversation into a group effort, with no one singled out to blame for making an error or a mistake. And that's just one example. Another example could be goals. A player may state an ambition, yet get belittled and shamed. This isn't helpful at all, and it's a certain way to ensure that players aren't going to be comfortable in their own skin. So that's right, really consider psychological safety if you're a coach. Have a read up on this. It can be really, really helpful in order to free your players up to express themselves. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this bumper solo episode and you've taken away the many key takeaways there. Should you wish to get in touch and discuss this any further, please do contact me through social media, be that on Instagram at Mental Toughness Matters. I'm also on Twitter at dcharltonsport, or you'll find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. Have a great week ahead as we get closer to Christmas. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.